Hello, everyone. I'm John Evans. Welcome to another episode of One-on-One. For more than 20 years, Monica Caison has walked through the woods. She's turned over the rocks and turned over the branches, trying to find missing persons like Peggy Carr and Brittany Drexel and Allison Jackson Foy. She formed Community United Effort in 1994, first as a way to support families whose loved ones had disappeared. But then Monica began actively organizing and doing the searches, becoming an ally with law enforcement as someone who could help solve missing person cases. But as I found out, Monica really needed to find herself before she could turn Q into a national organization. And part of that was born when someone Monica knew personally disappeared from her family's neighborhood in St. Petersburg, Florida.
Melinda Harder became missing when I was younger, before I even got married and whatnot. And I remember, our neighborhood was, everybody was looking for her. But it was in a time when you kind of didn't question authority or adults. And I remember always going up to the bus stop to see if she maybe gotten off the bus or whatnot. Everybody in our neighborhood always took the bus everywhere or walked. And, it kind of faded away. Our media at the time was more interested in why she was out, at a bar when she had a kid. Or actually she had more than one. And instead of really the fact that she was missing. I even go back now, shaking my head, reading the articles, and he almost described her, like it was something dirty to be out.
Making it her fault almost.
Right, yeah, definitely making it her fault. Yeah. And I just remember watching the family fall apart. The kids spun out of control. I was with them, so I know that firsthand. We took a lot to hanging out on the streets and finding comfort in other kids that were going through tough times. The mother worked in the home. She had a nursing home, and she was the only one in our neighborhood that had a pool, and that was home. So we kind of all knew her, and she kind of looked out for everyone because most of the other mothers were always working late and what have you. The one thing I remember is watching the father and his alcoholism. He'd sit at the picnic table, and he would drink all day long. Wow. And any time that you would stop and have a conversation with him, he would talk about her. And it got to where nobody stopped to talk to him anymore. It got to where her name wasn't mentioned anymore, and people just existed. And then it got to when I was an adult and married, you didn't mention it because you didn't want to bring that back up. Mm-hmm. It was in 2005, I was featured in the People magazine, and I went home to visit everyone, and I always stopped by this one police officer. His daughter was one of our good friends, and I always stopped by and see her. She still lived in the homestead, and her parents had moved on. And she had me sign the People magazine, and we started talking about the old days, and she said, I don't understand why you won't help Melinda's case. And I said, well, I can't bring myself to ask Miss Joan about it. I don't know. It's kind of like nobody talks about it anymore. And it had always bothered us. So she got on the phone right there in front of me and called Miss Joan, which I always did stop by and see her on my way out of town.
That's Melinda's mom?
Yes, Melinda's the mom. Right. And I would always stop by and see her, but she didn't know I was in town yet. So she called. She said, hey, Miss Joan, Monica's in town. And she's like, oh, tell her to come see me and whatnot. And she goes, I have a question. And she said, I want to know if you'll let Monica take Melinda's case and see if she can solve it. And she said, I've been waiting all these years for someone to ask. And I thought, wow. Oh, my gosh. Yeah. So I left and went there, and I felt like that 13-year-old kid coming up the gate in the back door because you didn't go to her front door. Yeah. And I walked up there, and when I got there, she was in a panic. She had boxes everywhere all over the floor, shoe boxes of old articles, and just it was amazing. And she had the case file. Then I received a call later and said, hey, meet me on 11th Street. And I have more of the case file from a retired officer.
Wow.
And he handed it to me, and I went up to my sister's house, which was a couple hours north of there, and I sat there for almost about 4 days and just vegged on the entire case going through. And I knew all the players. I knew all the people. I knew last names. And I couldn't believe that the case was so, like, for instance, everything was typewrite,
Oh, sure. Yeah. No, yeah.
And so it was like going back in time, but like they would have a name of a person. We went and talked to, say, Joe Blow, but they wouldn't have a last name, they wouldn't have an address, they wouldn't have a follow through. And what'd you go talk to them about? So I left within the first 30 minutes of just reading the case. I had 101 questions.
Yeah.
And my sister said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "I'm going to go ask them."
Yeah, I'm going to solve this
case. So after about 4 days at my sister's house, I went back and met with the mom again and kind of went over things. And then she told me things from her memory. And then I called the police department, and they put some little girl on it that had never done anything, I think just to appease me.
Sure.
So they kind of reopened the case. And what they didn't know is that girl was a fire. I mean, she was jumped right on it. And she was the largest role of solving that case. She did everything I asked. They were stuck on this basically Fifth Avenue bridge at one point. There was a letter saying that she would be found under 22,000 pounds of cement. And I thought, 22,000 pounds? I said, it would have to be an interstate or something. And she said, yeah, but that was already built. I said, oh, no, it wasn't.
Not back then.
No. And she said, oh, yes, it was. I said, oh, no, it wasn't. I said, you want to know why? Because my sister lived on the other side. We used to travel through the mud. And I stuck a Barbie doll in the mud one time down in there. I said, we used to run from the cops when we were little to go through the mud because they wouldn't chase us through there. So I know it wasn't built. I can attest to that. So, we started having a conversation, and then she started asking me a lot of other questions. And I was able to get minutes, which a lot of people weren't thinking about. But you could go back and pull the minutes to prove when the construction started from the city minutes. So we were able to do that. And in fact, they were still voting on the budget. So then I proved that, and we just kept going on. And then I said, well, before we start looking for her again, I said, let's see if we can get the case up to date. And I said, there's so many things now with CODIS, which is your DNA.
Yeah.
So that's what we did. I said, the mother and family still living. She has children living. I said, let's get their DNA. So we put that in order, and that was taking place. And in the meantime, I didn't like this reporter that had written all these stories. So I said, I'm going to put a really good story out there, and I'm going to call someone else. That's a larger newspaper. That's a bigger writer. And so we did. They came down and covered, and we did a candlelight service as a part of our national road tour. And at Crescent Lake, where we grew up, and all of us kids lived pretty much at that lake. And hundreds of people came. I mean, it was like my past reckoned, came to life. And people were coming out thanking us for coming and thanking us for remembering Melinda. And there was a police officer that contacted us. She had stopped to get a cup of coffee and we had done 16 by 20 posters. One I'd gotten a Canadian forensic artist to do just for shits and giggles. I got this Canadian officer, if you will, to make this age progression. Mm-hmm. And then I put her old picture out there. So long story short of that, the family, agreed that looked like her if she would have grown up and been older. And we put that on the poster. So these huge posters we were putting out everywhere. Come to the Candlelight Vigil. This is what Melinda looked like when she got missing. This is probably what she looks like now. And, not that we believe she was alive for a minute. So we get past that. This investigator stops to get a cup of coffee. She's from the other side of the county, and she's like, wow, that age progression really is striking to this Jane Doe that I have. Now, mind you, this Jane Doe was listed as a black female, 15 and 19 years old, never had smoked, never was pregnant, which I don't even understand why smoking was even on the certificate, but never had bared a child either. Melinda was Canadian white, 23 years old, had 3 children, and smoked everything back then, I'm sure. And so I was like, So anyways, she asked if Melinda was in CODIS in the DNA, and I said, yes. I said, we just got that done. And she said, well, I'm going to put our girl in there. And lo and behold, it came back a hit.
Wow.
And so 8 years after Melinda was murdered, her body was recovered in a place that we were hanging out at the time, not even knowing that they were recovering her. And for 28 years, she laid there as an unidentified female, as a black female. And the reason why, and I know in my heart, which the coroner's not alive today, or I would have really went after him, but I know in my heart that the coroner thought she was a black girl because she had an afro. And what he didn't know is that we used to perm each other's hair and cut each other's hair, and we made a lot of mistakes. And Melinda's had a bad perm, and her hair was like almost an afro, and she used to take the belts off of her shirt to put it around her head as a headband, kind of like some Indian gypsy.
But, I mean, of all the cases that you've handled, solving that one, I imagine, had to be a special place in your heart.
It was full circle for me, because although I never dreamed that I would be finding missing people and have a missing person organization or what have you, you know, when I ended up in that field, my mother had told me right before she passed that she goes, there are people who choose to do a life career, and then there's people who are chosen. And she said, and you, my dear, are chosen.
Oh, yeah.
So with that, you know, I said, if I could ever just go back and solve Melinda's case, you know, but it wasn't like I grew up saying, oh, one day I'm going to solve her case or I'm going to help missing people. It was really all just kind of, once the door opened, I was almost pushed through it by people I didn't even know.
Yeah, and because at that point in time when you were at that age, and even for years afterwards, you didn't know what your calling was at that point in time. You had no idea,
No,
right?
I was struggling just to survive the streets of St. Petersburg, Tampa, Florida, growing up as an inner city kid, you know, a divorced family. I have 10 siblings, and my parents were divorced in a time you didn't get divorced, you know, Catholic church, the whole 9 yards. And then we're thrust from this, you know, 3-story patent leather shoe life kind of thing with the ponytails to the ghetto, literally, and then the white ghetto after that. You know, it was like like Harlem ghetto, and then we got to step up when my mom got some kind of aid, and we were in the really tough neighborhood.
How did you survive that?
Well, us last 4 children of the 11 really spun out of control. We ended up, you know, taken to the streets and finding comfort in our friends that were probably just much turmoil as we were. You know, my mom was working all the time, which back then you think my mom's never home, she doesn't care, but you're not realizing that she's trying to take care of you. You know, we were in probably one of the worst custody battles that was ever known. You know, my father and my mom were constantly fighting over us, stealing us from each other. You know, so there was a lot of times we didn't go to school. I remember one time my father took me, and I was in Virginia, Massachusetts, and somewhere else, and I was like 11.
And you didn't know that?
I didn't know where I was. I didn't even know if I was supposed to be in school or not.
Yeah.
Right. You know, he used to come to our window and say, "Come on," and I'd go out it.
Yeah.
Because I hated the life that I was in. I wasn't, you know, used to that kind of life, so thinking it would be better, and it was a little better with my father, but it wasn't solid, you know. It wasn't as solid as foundation being with the family. So, you know, my parents loved us, and they tried the best, but I think they were really tired when it came to the last 4 of us, and I think we suffered all of that because I talked to my older siblings all the time, and they did not have the parents we did.
Do you remember a time or a specific incident where you may have come close to losing your life, to come close to giving into, I don't want to say the dark side, but illegal drugs or anything like that, where you almost got to the point where you weren't here for the next 40 or 50 years?
Yeah, my sister said one time, anytime her phone rang after 9 o'clock, my oldest sister, she said, anytime my phone used to ring after 9 o'clock, she said, I would always look at it and think, they found Monica somewhere. And she said she hated that. And I never knew that back then, but, you know, we were wild, and I was probably worst out of all of them because I was headstrong and thought I could take care of myself at 10, 11 years old. We were staying out all night. I remember coming to North Carolina when I was barely 16 years old on my own. And
didn't you hitchhike here?
Yeah.
Is that how it happened?
Yeah. If you go to the 76 truck stop, Union truck stop, you can go anywhere in the world. And that was pretty much any runaway kid in Florida. If you could make it to Tampa, 76 truck stop, Union, you could go anywhere in the world. And what's funny is I left in a bathing suit and a pair of jeans and $2 in my back pocket and flip-flops. I got there with a coat, a pool stick, $40, and a carton of cigarettes.
Wow.
Because you could work.
Yeah.
You know, you would help. You know, one guy had beans and you know, he just like, if you help unload this truck, I'll give you $40. Okay. So you just, you know, you learn.
School of hard knocks, didn't you? Yeah.
Yeah. My parents never knew where we were half the time.
And why did you come to North Carolina?
My mom had met a man and married, and they moved up here. And my baby brother and sister were sending me letters telling me that it was horrible. They were being abused physically. And basically, I came up here to rescue them, and I did. I got them out, and I hitchhiked them, which were all both younger than me, back to Florida and brought them to my sister's house. And from there, they went into what they call group home activity. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like foster care, but for teens. And then they ended up back in North Carolina, back into my mother's care. And then they ended up back into my care at 18.
And you came to that was when you were 16, but you came to North Carolina, I guess, I don't want to say for good, but was it you came back here at 18? Is that when it was?
Yeah, well, I wasn't 18. I celebrated my 18th birthday up here.
Okay.
So I was probably, when I came back the second time, when they had shipped my brother and sister back up here, I got a job back in the day when Shoney's and Kettle Restaurant was on Market Street.
Oh, yeah.
And I worked there, and I was working 2 jobs, and then I was moonlighting on the weekend mornings at another breakfast house, and I made pretty good money, you know, and my brother and sister were living with me, and I had a 2-bedroom trailer, 2-bath, 2-bedroom, and was sending them to school and doing the best I knew how. My father was helping. You know, he would come up often, and he would give some child support as well. And my mother was nearby, but she was pretty much at that point disconnected from them. And then, you know,
You got married at 85.
Yes, got married at 85. And, you know, I've had a lot of ups and downs learning how to grow up on my own. I always tell my husband we finished raising each other.
Yeah.
And so...
Because you were both young 20s, weren't you?
Yeah.
22, 23?
Yes.
You were 22, if I remember
Yes.
correctly.
And when we met, he was 15 and I was 16. It was at church. And we kept in touch. And I always told him, I said, if I ever get married, you know, we'll marry each other. But, you know, we used to kid about it and everything. And it was just funny. And we actually hung out. We were friends and just hung out. We enjoyed being around each other. And
I read one story about you where you said your husband was afraid of you.
He was afraid of me because he was like, well, I have to ask my mom because we were going somewhere. And I was like, and he goes, you have to. And she said, I need to let my mom know or ask my mom or something. I'm like, you have to ask permission? Like, I could ask him when I was like 10 years old. So a city kid, you know, and the kind of lifestyle I was used to, I mean, our parents didn't even know where we were half the time.
You got married, 5 children that you've raised. Mm-hmm. When did you tell your kids about the upbringing you had? Or was that just a lesson learned along the way and don't do what I did, son, don't do what I did, daughter?
No, I think my kids had me on some kind of pedestal, thinking that I never did anything wrong or whatnot. And it was when the Reader's Digest did the article. Mm-hmm. I was in so much turmoil over that article because, you know, they came to me wanting to do just the story on me, and I bargained with them. I said, you know, the only way I'll do anything to talk about anything in my past is if you feature some cases of missing people. I said, because it's not about me, and I could care less who knows about me, kind of thing. So they agreed, and they did. They did like a seven-page spread, and they featured Allison Foy and numerous of other cases and told about their story. But in that, I had to, you know, talk about my past and growing up rough and things of that sort. And so it was funny because right before it was getting ready to come out, I called the director or executive director of the magazine. I said, I'm not doing this. Forget it. I don't want to do it. And she talked to me for like 30 minutes, and she was like, Monica, I promise you this is a good thing. And I said, no, I've decided I don't. And she couldn't do it.
Yeah.
So then they had 2 or 3 other people, and it was actually the photographer that called me. And he goes, look, he said, I've done photography for Princess Diana and many other people. And when they brought me to Wilmington, North Carolina, I said, why in the world, who is this kid? Like, why am I shooting her? Like, have I been depromoted or something? Or demoted, if you will. And he goes, but then I got to know you and saw what you did and heard so many other stories from other people, not you telling them, but other people. And he said, and you need to do this. So long story short, you know, he said, just sit your kids down. So that's what I did. Yeah. And they were kind of shocked. A few of them was like, well, I always knew there was something, you know, but they, you know, I just said, I just want you to know that this is going to come out, and I don't want you to be blindsided. And, you know, and there's way much more that isn't told.
Right.
But, you know, your mom isn't this angel, you know, that you thought she was or whatnot.
Between 85 and the time that Q actually began in the early 90s, what did you do? Because, I mean, I know you were helping, you were volunteering in town, you were working and raising kids. What did you do for a living before Q actually started to form?
I did, I volunteered like 24 hours a week at schools through my kids. They were all in different grades and whatnot. I was real active in the community, sat on a lot of different boards and whatnot, Azalea and Riverfest. And I stayed with Riverfest 20 plus years. I just was I think I consumed myself with constant volunteerism. Mm-hmm. And when I started the pageant stuff, it was to do charity work. I think my first donation I made, the first recipient of the pageants was like the Yahweh Center. Mm-hmm. And then I did, some others. And and then we got involved in working the soup kitchens during the holidays. And my kids were all involved in this too, but I just became charity driven.
When did you meet Karen? When was that meeting? When did you get together with her?
Karen was in 93. I was working with some kids in the bottoms, mentoring to gangbangers and stuff because I had a lot of history in that. And it was just through some job ready program kind of thing, trying to mentor kids and whatnot. And there was a contest, and we did where you raise, whoever raised the most money, the kids won a gift. I think it was to Carowinds or something. And so I was like, oh, well, okay, I'll do it. And there was like 6 or 7 kids that did it. And so I was like, well, let's do missing kids. I said, no one cares about that. I don't even know why I said that, because everybody's going to do cancer, everybody's going to do AIDS, everybody's going to do, whatever. But I just said it. I said, let's do missing kids. Nobody cares about that, and we'll kind of stand out, because everybody else is going to pick, stuff that everybody picks, I guess. And so we did. And so I contacted the North Carolina Center, which is a government agency, and I spoke to a man named John Goad. And he ended up becoming my mentor for the next 4 years. Right. And we immediately hit it off. And he said, well, we're government, so we can't really take a donation. He said, however, and he said, I just had a call days ago from a woman in Wilmington that's trying to put this kiddie carnival thing together and raise awareness and raise funds for this nonprofit group. And they do missing kids. So how ironic is that? And her name was Karen Brown. So he gave me the number. I contacted her, met her on Oleander Pizza Hut, and sat there through lunch and almost into dinner talking to her. And next thing I know, we were helping her because I had festival background and all this stuff and connections. And we got her stages. We built a wall in Marketplace Mall, which is gone now, but we built this wall. We had Matlock and his cast came out and unveiled the wall. It was just crazy. Henry Winkler showed up and gave a speech, just kind of rolled up in a limo. And I remember somebody tapped me saying, Henry Winkler, and I'm saying, well, he'll just have to wait. And then I turned around, I was like, oh, you mean the Fonz?
The Fonz, yeah.
So he came up and, and spoke on the subject or whatnot. And he actually gave me his phone number, which I washed in my clothes. So, yeah. And, but, it was just a great day. She raised over her goal. And, we were able to present that, so the kids won the trip to Carowinds. I was done. I was done. And then Karen was persistent. It was back when you had answer machines. I'd come home every day, and she was on my answer machine, almost like a bill collector, trying to get me to take over this program. And I said, look, she goes, I'm moving up north, and I'm going to open a home for pregnant teens and whatnot, and that's really my passion. And she goes, I don't even really know why I started this, but she goes, I just feel like I was made to get things going for you or something. And she said it was weird. And then she left a 10-page letter on my door. And it took me like 4 days before I ever picked it up to read it. And I was like, God, this woman is persistent. She's getting on my nerve. Wow. And but in that letter, she said, I believe that people are brought into your path in life to open doors and sometimes encourage you to go through them. And she said she felt like that was her whole role in this missing person thing. And next thing I know, she's at my house, and she's, come on, I'm going to dissolve this nonprofit group. And what are you going to call your group? And I was like, Karen, I said, it would take a community and one big effort that has to unite to even find them. That's it. Community United Effort. It was literally written on a pad going down the road.
Really?
And it wasn't any big brainstorm. It wasn't any, anybody else's input. It was just,
And that was the genesis of the whole thing.
Yep. and it was community night effort. It was actually the media that started dubbing us Q.
Yeah.
And when they dubbed us Q, I went ahead and got that name legal too.
Yeah. So. I remember some of those very first days.
Yeah.
Because it was, Amy Frink disappeared down in Brunswick County.
Yes.
And Bertie is a dear soul and one of the dearest friends I have. But that wasn't your first search under Q, was it? It wasn't Amy.
No.
Who was the first one under Q?
Oh, goodness. Well, there was many runaways, you know, and the police would appease us and give us, runaways to kind of like just, And then I remember this one detective saying, why are you out searching for missing people? Aren't you like a soccer mom? I said, I don't like soccer at all. And he just sat there and looked at me and kind of gave me a dirty look, which we became very, very dear friends over all the years. And I consider him a very best friend at this point. But he really didn't want to give me time of day, and most of them didn't. They would just give us the runaways and stuff. Then we worked a few suicides, and then it was the Caison King's Grant. I don't know if you remember the suicide.
I don't off the top of my head.
And which I try not to talk about it because the family's still local and they don't.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah.
But it was those boys that I kept saying we need to do a 2-mile radius search, and everybody's like, oh, they're probably gone, And then it was like days later, we at the very place that we were hanging posters, a man had stopped to relieve himself and found both the boys in the woods right there in Kings Grant. Right where I said I want to search, and the police didn't want me to search.
What did that do in their eyes, the eyes of law enforcement, for you?
Well, that's when the detective started taking time with me then, because he was like, maybe she does know some things, and she's willing to get out there, And the main thing they would use us for in the early days is like to comfort the family. Mm-hmm. And I didn't mind playing that role at all, and I would actually call in other teams, because I did learn that you have to have professional teams, and I wasn't professionally trained to search. And so the first couple years, that's what we'd do. We'd fund that. We would bring in other teams, experts, and our organization would fund that. We would get the meals. We would do whatever we had to do to make the search happen for the family. And it was watching some of the teams over the years walk by someone, and I would actually go and search after them and find them, meaning a body, without a dog, and just on my own, like knowing nothing. I thought, there's got to be more to this. Why aren't they finding these people? Mm-hmm. And so that's when I started educating myself and receive a lot of training myself, and then became a dog handler as well.
When you say fund, in the early days, mm-hmm. How difficult was it to get the funds? Where did you go for them? I mean, I know you existed on donations and funding as a nonprofit, but where did you go in those very earliest days for funding?
When I started, I didn't really know anyone, and not a whole lot of people. I mean, people were telling me, you're never going to be able to get people to volunteer and follow you around. You're never going to be able to, missing people isn't that big of a deal where you're going to need funding. And so it was very hard. And so I just funded it myself most of the time. My husband was probably my very first donor. He was giving me thousands of dollars, throughout the year, just to whatever I needed. And then I started doing smaller things. When I got involved with the pageants, I incorporated those girls for 1 year. When you win your title, you have to work missing persons. And I would incorporate that with them. So they would come up, and families would come up with ideas. Hey, let's do a car wash. Let's, do a candy sale. And so it was very small. I remember we sell like 4 tickets for $1, for raffle tickets. And now they're like $5 a piece kind of thing. So it was really just me. I feel like God constantly putting people in my path to help educate me and help train me, and just opportunity and for ideas. And then, like I said, I brought the handbook on how to run a nonprofit, and that's probably got 10 different highlighters in it. I'd go over it, make sure I was doing everything perfect and right, and in timely manner. The one biggest thing I can tell you is that it says send out a letter to all people in your field, introduce yourself, so forth. So I did that. I got every organization. This was back. It's hard work to get addresses when you didn't have the internet.
That's true.
And so I got every address of anyone who mattered in the missing person world. And I sent them a professional letter. I even had a reporter help proof it because my spelling wasn't great, still isn't. and they kind of helped me put it together. And not one, it was crickets. Not one person offered to help. Not one person wanted another person in their arena.
Right.
Because I think one lady even said when I called her, she said, well, it's just another person in there for grants, so you're not going to get a warm welcome. I said, well, we're not asking for grants. We're going to fund our own self. And I remember her laughing at me. Her organization is closed down now, but she still refers people to us.
Well, coming full circle
right.
in so many ways. The one that really touched many, many people around here, the first one was Peggy Carr.
Yes.
And I've gotten to know Penny years and through the entire time, but I don't want to say that's the one that launched Q, but that really took your name to a next level when it comes as far as to searching and then finding the remains, which were then found.
Yes. With the Peggy Carr case, she is our landmark case as far as I'm concerned. We were already in existence into our 4th year. But until then, it was weird because a week before her case came to light, I had spoke to my board of directors, and I remember standing up and telling them, I just don't feel like we're doing enough. I don't feel like we're completing the mission. It seems like we're doing more community events and fundraising and awareness, but we're really not getting out there helping the people and getting in there with the families like I want to do. And they were like, well, how do you propose us doing that? And I was like, I don't know, but I'm just presenting the problem and we need to figure it out. A week later, Joe Carney shows up at my door. It just came and found me and said, we need your help. Now, right now. Yeah. And I'm literally getting dressed while he's talking to me and putting my dog up and, whatever. And I was out the door and I never came home for 7 months and 10 days. And that case answered every question and every doubt that I ever had in myself or the organization or where I needed to go. It taught me what families need, how they need it, how to present it, what not to say, what to say. Joe Carney every night, would call me, okay, what's the story for tomorrow? What are we doing for Peggy tomorrow? He taught me about marketing. He taught me about, it was just, and all these people kept coming into my life through that case that had an expertise. And it's like God just wrapped everything up in that one case and taught me every question I had and gave me avenues to get better at what I do.
But the thing that I remember about it is that during the searches, when Penny came here and when the family members came here, it not only was news here, but because she was well known up there in her part of Ohio, that it also got the media from Ohio involved. So it spread
all
the name
in between.
Right, it spread the name of Q past just the Wilmington, southeastern
Correct.
North Carolina area.
Correct. When we first started, you had to be either missing from North Carolina or missing on your, in North Carolina. In other words, those were the first few years. The Peggy Carr case changed us into a national organization, and where we didn't have borders anymore or any kind of rules.
Right. Yeah.
And so, yes, Ohio was tremendously supportive. I mean, I remember them sending cookies to my house, baked hams, all kinds of food through the mail and donations and just supportive written content, because again, you really didn't have the internet. I remember we did one page on internet for Peggy. Like it wasn't like it is now.
And Penny was so appreciative.
Yes.
She'd come down and she'd spend time here and then go back and come down. And for years and years, she would come back every year for your event and would do it as well.
Well, when I met her, she said, I'm not going home without my daughter. And she stayed, oh my gosh. Yeah. I think she went home maybe 3 times in the whole 7 months. And one of them was the last time she had went home. We'd finally talked her into just going home and getting some rest. And that's when Peggy was found, and she turned around and came right back.
Do you remember that second that the remains turned up in Bladen County?
Yes.
Take me back to that and your thoughts and if you can put yourself in that spot.
Well, let's back up a couple months prior to that. Me and Penny were sitting in a hotel, and we had the door open, and Penny doesn't smoke. And she said, give me a cigarette. And I said, no. And she said, give me a cigarette. Her nerves were tore up. She had just had it. Excuse me. The family was wanting her to come home. She was feeling torn. And she said, I need to know what the lesson is in all this. And I said, what do you mean? She goes, everything in life has a lesson. I need to understand it, and I don't, and that's my frustration. And we started talking about the guys at this point we knew who had hurt Peggy. And I said, why don't you write him a letter? And she said, can I? And I said, yeah. I said, just write him a letter. But I said, please don't talk to him in a downward manner, though. I said, talk to him like, I need your help. Please give me my daughter back. So she did. And we got a letter back, and it was just a map. And that was leaked or something to the Star News, or maybe he sent a copy. I really don't remember the gist of all of it. Right. But it ended up in everybody's hands. And so immediately everybody hit the ground running. Joe Carney was getting a plane up that morning, and I believe already had it. We were waiting for the rain to come to subside, and we were already out on the ground. And as soon as there was a farmer that had recognized the layout of the map and went and walked up the path and thought he had saw something and went and got the sheriff. I think it was Sheriff Bunn at the time.
Steve Bunn, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so, we were all out there, and it was a victory to know she had been recovered and that law enforcement now could move forward with the prosecution and different things and whatnot. But the first thing I think I thought about was Penny, because I knew she wasn't here.
Right.
And that was, I think, one of her fears too. She wanted to be here when she was found. But that was my first thought was, oh my, the family.
Can you explain what it was like to tell her?
Well, I think I really can't even remember who was actually the first one who told her, but I know when I talked to her, because she was getting on and off planes, she wasn't here yet, and I want to say she was in Raleigh, or she was getting ready to land in Raleigh, and I went up there. Matter of fact, I think that was the picture on every paper that day, and she got off, and there was no word spoke. I just hugged her, and then we came, and then we went with law enforcement out to the site the next day. And I remember driving in the van thinking, God, Peggy knew she was in trouble. Yeah. Just that long.
Well, because they wanted to take her car at that point in time, right. And then they realized, she must have realized.
But that long road just traveling, she knew she was in trouble. And that really bothered Penny because she was in the vehicle with us, and it really bothered me. Because I just, it's kind of like she knew they were taking her to the woods.
Can you describe the satisfaction of the end, even though it was remains, you still succeeded in giving Penny her daughter back?
Absolutely. We walked hand in hand, and I mean literally night and day. There were some days I would pull up with Subway in a bag and beep the horn, and my kids would come running out, and I'd hand it to them and take back off. I mean, it was crazy. And Penny came to my house and started relationships with all my kids, and it was funny, years later, my youngest son, who was at the time, I think was probably maybe 8 when all this first happened. It was years later, I heard my son talking to one of his friends. He goes, yeah, my Aunt Penny's coming to town. And I'm like, Penny? I said, Penny's not your aunt. He goes, yes, she is. He had forgot and thought she was, a family member. But she would, and they actually bought our first computer for the organization. Nice. They did a fundraiser and bought our first layout computer, printer, the whole 9 yards. And she actually designed in my home on that computer, was the first thing ever done on it, was Peggy's, her thing for her funeral. Yeah. She designed that with the shamrock. I remember putting clip art and all that, and it was a struggle to figure out how to make this brochure, if you will. It was just crazy how, it was satisfaction because we completed our mission, and it was the full mission from the beginning to the end. And everything we learned in between, I think it took me a year just to kind of download everything that I did learn. And then I started putting it in bylaws within the organization. It helped inspire me for new brochures. It helped inspire me for a new message and just a new direction.
That obviously you became a national organization at that point in time, but then all of a sudden I would call you, or you would call and ask me to do the candlelight vigil. And you say, I just got back from so-and-so, or I'm heading out to so-and-so. And all of a sudden you're everywhere.
Yeah.
You grew I mean, I don't want to even say exponentially. I mean, you grew in a heartbeat.
Yeah, it was.
And did it ever get to the point where it's like, I'm too big here. I'm in over my head?
I didn't feel like I was ever in over my head, because it seemed like as I grew, that again, I have to give credit, because I'm very faith-based organization. I feel like God just continued to keep putting people in my path. New training, new developments, new supporters, new donors, people with bigger and better ideas that wanted to, that didn't have the backing I did to make it happen, but had the idea. And so it just, I feel like, yes, I grew, but with the help of a lot of people constantly there to be my foundation. We could stay here all day, and Allison Jackson Foy and Angela Rothen and Brittany Drexel. Another one I remember, though, is Kinande Bennett. Kinande Bennett.
The girl whose mom said she disappeared from a Walmart in Whiteville.
Kmart.
Kmart in Whiteville. Describe the thought process there, because it turned out that mom and dad were both later arrested, and
the mother was charged.
Right. Was there any anger in some situations like that when you're led to believe that the child literally, really, truly was abducted, but it later turns out that the parents had something to do with it?
Well,
because that's not the only one either. There have been others who have used your organization to try to escape from different things or cover things up.
With Kinande's case, law enforcement immediately took me in the back and kind of gave me where they were coming from immediately. So I went into it with my eyes wide open, even though I still didn't kind of believe it, because I feel like people can be wrong. And but the one thing with Kinande's case that it overnight made me fight for her, and I think is because the lack of family that cared. Like, most people would be in a panic for a 3-year-old child to be missing. And the community was not embracing the case. Matter of fact, I remember a guy driving by in a truck and said, why don't you get the hell off the street and look for this kid? Her mama don't even care where she's at. People were yelling, ugly things while our search teams were going into the woods, like, just go home if the mama don't care. And they were just bashing her. And then the one biggest thing is, I remember there was a billboard that I wanted to get, and the man told me he was not going to put any black child on the billboard.
Wow.
And so I experienced a lot in that case, and I came out fighting for her, and I still do. I even remember the grandmother leaving a message a year later after the mother was convicted of the charges. She went to prison. The grandmother, I was doing something for Kinande, and the grandmother left a message on her answer machine and said, quit putting her up to the top of the bunch. I'm sure there's other missing kids you can go out there and find. And I thought, for an hour, I sat there and listened to it over and over again. I said, what kind of grandmother? And I wasn't a grandmother yet, but what kind of grandmother, mother, any family member would say that? Mm-hmm. So I feel like me and the DA are the only two still look for Kinande, still care about Kinande. I've never gotten a call from any family member in concerns of why we're not searching or what we're doing in the case. And we continue to go out and do trainings looking for her. And it's very sad, but it's, that case right there angered me beyond, because they had the media help. They had, the immediate help right at the onset. The kid wasn't even missing, hours, and we were involved. We were turning over dumpsters,
right.
We were, yeah. And then to
set
know
up
in
the parking lot of the store, if I'm not mistaken, like a little tent in the parking lot of the store was the kind of like the HQ.
Yep,
there.
And then the funeral home, the local funeral home, brought us some tents out and moved us to the corner of some property they owned, which gave us a larger area. And there were people from South Carolina that came up. There was communities that cared about this child, but even the grandmother, she didn't get there until, I don't know, I had to call them. And I said, I can't understand why you're not here. Your grandchild is missing. I would have had my pork chops in the stove underwater and been out the door with curlers in my hair, And and again, this was before I was even a grandmother. And I'm talking to this lady who's a stranger like this. And she said, I'll be up there Wednesday. And this was like a Friday.
Wow. Didn't you have a businessman who faked his own disappearance at one point in time too?
Yes, and we had put a lot into that. And the bad part about it is he had ripped his stereo out of his car and abandoned his car. But when he did that, he actually cut his hand and left blood. So, I mean, law enforcement thinking, what's going on here? Was he robbed? It's his blood, and then I think days later, law enforcement found him down in Florida checking into a hotel with some blonde. Oh, my God. And, the community, they were good to us, but they were horrible to the family, and it wasn't their fault, know. And so I went to bat for the family and had to kind of calm that down because, no one can know when you're married to someone so many years. And there was another one up in Rocky Point or up in Pender County, that 25-year marriage, 5 kids or 3 kids or something. And he was going to the bank to drop off money. I mean, who would have thought?
Never saw it again.
Yeah. Who would have thought that, he left his wife and just didn't know how to, I guess, hire an attorney or something. Yeah. So, but those cases linger over to the true abductions like Alice Donovan and all these other cases.
My next point then is how do you keep from not being jaded? Because you've got the Allison Jackson Foys, you've got the Brittany Drexels, you've got the Alice Donovans, and how do you not be jaded? Because you have to treat everyone as if it's the most important at the time, right?
Yeah, you can't be jaded. You have to go in every time just, with your heart wide open to help them. And if you get hurt in the process or you get burned in the process, you can look at it and use it as experience in the future, maybe guard yourself a little bit more. But, I mean, to do missing person work, I have to just be, I go in expecting nothing, giving all, and just trying to do the best I can for these people and hope that in some small way my contribution or the organization has made a difference in their journey, good or bad. And even some of the ones that we should be jaded in, I've formed relationships with the family and they're supporters of our organization, even though their case wasn't a true abduction or what have you. If you go in bringing every past case with you, you're not going to be able to see what's right in front of your face. So you have to go in with an open mind and heart.
What one was the most emotional for you?
Oh, wow. There's a lot of them, but the one that probably put me in the bed, which was C.J. Wilkerson, the little boy from Raleigh. He was 9 years old, and he was suitcase, and he was missing for 4 months. And I walked that journey every moment with both of his parents. And they were separated, a lot of family dynamics. And there was a donor from overseas that called and said, spare no expense, find the kid. And I mean, we put that kid on anything that didn't move and did move. And we never gave up. And to have a resolve in that case, and then the donor put me in charge of his funeral. And that did me in, because I was in charge of this man's money, who I didn't know who he was. He remained anonymous. I still today don't know who he is. Mm-hmm. And it was through a foundation that they handled everything. But I had to go and I've shared a lot of private moments with families and some of the most darkest secrets and painful secrets. But I've never had to bury a 9-year-old child and had to make all the decisions and had to approve all the decisions. So that was very tough. I even at one point called the foundation and had called them and said, I can't do this. I said, this is just, it's too close. I have a child this age. I can't do this. It's just too much. I don't feel I have the right to sit in there and tell them, well, let's get this flower. It's, $40 less than, it's their child. And the donor came back and said, if you don't do it, no one will. And they're paying for the funeral. So at that point, I put my big girl pants on and sucked it up, and I, tried to be. I feel like I gave the most respect I could give at any level, and it was a beautiful funeral. We moved it. We started at a church, moved it to a. Within 2 days, started at a church, moved it to a auditorium for a school, and then we ended up in this Catholic, huge cathedral, if you will. It seated 2,000 plus people. And that place was packed. There was standing room only, and it was a 9-hour ordeal. The funeral was like 2.5 hours. Then we walked to the cemetery. We did dove releases. I mean, just anything that I could top off. Like we're gonna just make it so special. And
how long did it take you to recover?
A year.
Really?
Yeah. I actually, even today, because of that. If we get a kid case, I usually try to give someone else to take lead on it. I'm like, I don't do kids. And then they're like, Monica, we need you. And then I will. But like right off the bat, I don't want to do the kid cases.
You know, you said a couple of minutes ago, you said, I just try to give and not expect anything in return. Mm-hmm. But human beings can only give so much. Where do you go for your extra? Where do you find that extra 10% when you're ready to max out?
Spending a Sunday with my granddaughter, watching her in private lessons for horses that she's doing. Going late night shopping at Walmart with my grandson, or even taking him out and train just to get out away from everybody and just go out and teach him about what we're looking for and the things and have those harsh conversations with him because he's very, very into this, missing persons. Talking to an old friend, sitting on a beach, but mostly I would say church or reaching out to some, I have several pastors that aren't even my pastors that when they see me like on TV or they'll see me out running hard on a case, they'll call me and they'll say, hey, and as soon as they say, hey, I just break down, you know, because it's like, I know why they're calling, and I'll tell them all the frustrations and what I'm going through, and they'll help build me back up. I have a lot of good friends and supporters, and even other families that I've had recoveries on have become extended family for me. So
that's where you charge the battery? Yeah,
I think I charge it every day. Sometimes it's an early morning phone call from a family that I've had a recovery, you know, in Colorado or California or something, or it could be a late night phone call from, you know, a sibling or someone else that just, you know, want to know how you're doing, want to know, you know, what your frustrations are. And then I have a lot of law enforcement officials that are become great friends that, you know, I can go to and get mentorship and or present a problem. And I'm the kind of person, if I can figure out the problem, then I'm 1,000% better. It's the part that when I can't figure something out or I don't know how to approach something, then that worries me more than anything. You know, bringing home someone, that's the icing on the cake.
You know, I've seen it from the very beginning, and it still amazes me that you've been able to find the intestinal fortitude to be able to go on, because even though you have found remains and brought closure, you're still dealing with a lot of people that are going through heartache and sorrow. And frankly, I don't know where you've come up with all of that over the years. It's amazing to me that God has given you the fortitude and the wherewithal to do what you've done. And the people who call you an angel, and I know Penny Carr-Britton
with
has
a
called
broken
you,
wing.
Yeah, but she's called you an angel from the very beginning. Birdie Frink, so many of these other people. And I don't think there's a better way to describe you as other than that.
I'm just a person that I think I found my calling, and I'm lucky enough to have a husband that can support me, that I can do what I do, because I don't do it for a drive of a career. I don't do it for a drive of a paycheck. So
you've never taken a paycheck.
Right, never. And that's why I'm saying, you know, as long as, you know, I've just been blessed with a husband and a life that I'm afforded and able to do it. And I've always been a multitasker. So, you know, working, you know, being there still for my kids and coming in from a search. I'll never forget one time when my daughter was winning some kind of is it the Women of the World or something?
Yes.
And, you know, I had to be there, and the bridge went up, and we were coming in from a search, and we're full of mud, we're dirty, and my whole search team was like, just go, get to the school. And we all walked in there, and we walked right in the back, and we're full of mud. We all got boots on and everything, and we walked to the back of the auditorium, and they called her name right when we walked in, and we all hollered and everything. And everybody, after that, they were like, God, I think it's so cool what your mom does. You know, we felt like heels walking in there, but it was like, you know, they can't say I didn't always try and make sure I was there no matter what. And that's pretty much how I've always tried to live my life. You know, I'm 100% at I give it all or I give nothing. I can't do the 50% or, you know.
You've been 110% since I've known you.
Yeah.
And running on you know, when you fill up your gas tank, it doesn't just go to F, it goes to F plus a little bit.
Right.
Yours has gone to F plus since the very day.
Well, you have to have reserve.
Yeah. If anybody wants to get a hold of you or wants to be a part of Q, Community United Effort, give us an idea where they can get a hold of you.
It's easy. They can go to our website. Now everybody has a phone or whatnot. You can go to www.ncmissingpersons.org. We're actually getting ready to launch a brand new site next week. So I'm excited about that. I've already seen it. It's built. It's ready. So it's going to be different colors, different information, different subjects. Just with the growth in times, it's time to have a new site. But they can go to our website, email us at qcenter@aol.com. They can call us. We have 24-hour line. 910-232-1687. I mean, we're not hard to find.
I've had that on every one of my cell phones since 1994, I believe.
Yeah.
Is it good to know that you literally, to the point now where Q is, no matter where you get the call from,
yes,
you can go and you have a network now that you can get a group of volunteers or a group to help almost immediately everywhere?
Yes, and we have, and with that, I came up with the concept because it was getting hard for everybody in North Carolina to go to all these other places. And so what happened was I started networking with professional teams throughout the country and getting them to sign up to volunteer with Q. And then a lot of them just kind of came over to our side, if you will. A lot of them were independent dog handlers or whatever. And then it's like everybody just wanted to, we have over 15,000 registered right now.
Right.
That are in our database from sonar and land, water, air. It's just crazy the resources that we have. And to provide that to law enforcement at only a phone call, we can make it happen and we will fund that. And so, with that, just comes a lot of growth and the word keeps getting out there. It makes me proud to know when someone calls me from St. Petersburg, Florida, I don't even have to be there half the time anymore. I can say, hold on, and I'll get you. And then I'll have, 30 to 50 people there. Just give me a minute.
Yeah. Well, in 2018, from those days in the early 90s, I'm going to use your name. The community has united behind your effort. And we thank you for everything you've done. And there are thousands of families who want to thank you as well. Well,
I appreciate that. And we can't do it alone, and we certainly haven't done it alone. And the media has played a great role in letting people get our message out there, especially with the missing people. I don't understand how anybody can find anyone if they don't let the world know they're looking for it.
Yeah.
And you guys, have been tremendously supportive of getting that message out there. And so you guys have to thank yourself as well.
No, you're well worth the effort. You're well worth the effort. Monica, thanks for stopping by.
Absolutely. Thanks.
Thank you to Monica Caison for coming in for this week's podcast. The Q Center is always looking for volunteers, whether it be to help in searches or to help support the families whose loved ones have disappeared. You can get more information at their website. It is ncmissingpersons.org. Next week, we mark the 20-year anniversary of Dawson's Creek shooting in Wilmington and debuting on the WB network. Nina Rapetta will join us. She played Bessie Potter on that show for 6 years.
But I will say, like that first season, there was something so pure that it unfolded before us. And I think it wasn't until season 2 or season 3 that it just blew up. I think especially for the stars, because I'm not one of the main stars. I played Katie's sister on the show.
Right.
But as I watched the fans come forward, I remember one time we were shooting at the USO building, 2nd and Orange.
Yeah.
And the fans followed us everywhere. Dawson's Creek, unlike Matlock so much, we were like shooting little movies. So everywhere we went, we were on location, and the fans could find us, and they did. And it just, people gathered and gathered. So we knew it was taking on speed because the people started showing up, and it used to be a handful, and then there were hundreds, and then we had to have the cops to hold them back because everyone wanted to be next to the stars.
That's an entertaining interview with Nina Rapetta coming up next week right here on our podcast. And if you know someone who you think would be a good interview for an upcoming episode, I really would like to know about it. Send me an email, jevans@wect.com, with your idea. And if you would be so kind as to subscribe to the podcast or leave me a rating or a review and then send me a screenshot of it, again, by email, you could be the lucky listener we pick at random, and we'll send you one of those really cool WECT travel mugs. I'm John Evans. Thanks so much for joining us for this week's episode of One on One.